I tell you, Claude Code, it feels like it knows me so much better now. And I'm also getting the sense that I am more working with a colleague than working with an AI assistant. And the only thing I changed was I restructured its file. Okay, and what is the Claude.md file? It is a text file that lives in your project folder. And every single time you start a conversation with Claude Code, it will read that file first before you do anything. Now, normally you would ask Claude Code to generate the Claude.md file for you by running the init command. But this init command, and really the whole concept around the Claude.md file, is designed for software teams. It's designed for describing code bases. And if you are working in a knowledge base like I am, it's not quite the right fit. So for knowledge workers, the generated version is not ideal. It works. I've been running with the generated version of the Claude.md file for months now, but it's not ideal. But the mechanism behind it, this idea that it's a file that Claude reads every single time you start a conversation with it, that's useful as long as you frame it in the right way. All right, what we're going to chat about in this video is first, what is a Claude.md file? And then how and why to rewrite it as a job description, how this ends up changing Claude's behavior, and then you'll be ready to have Claude help you write its own job description. Okay, so this all started when I was filming a tutorial I released recently on how to install Claude Code from scratch. And when I was filming all of this, I asked it to create the Claude.md file. It refused because it rightfully said, this isn't a code base. You don't need a Claude.md file. And I'll actually just show the clip now. So I actually had this very funny interaction with Claude Code when I ran the init command. It pushed back a little bit on whether this project needed a Claude.md file because it wasn't a code base. Because of course, Claude Code is primarily for programming. I've never had this pushback before. This is the first time. And I insisted a bit because the point of the Claude.md file is to have this constant context load every time Claude Code opens. And being an LLM, it did comply. So it did make the Claude.md file so that any new Claude Code sessions that we open here will have this loaded. So as you can see, I pushed back and it did end up generating the file for me, but it's got me thinking about how to improve the process. And a few days later, I happened to be listening to this podcast. It was an episode of AI and I. I'll link it in the description. It's a really nice overview of how they built a project management agent. And at some point, they mentioned that they had written the Claude.md file for this agent as a job description. So I decided to try to do something like this with my own project. And I've been testing it for about 2 weeks now. And I can say that the results have been extremely impressive. Okay, so these are the 4 sections that I now have structured my Claude.md file around. I start with a description of your role, which is to say Claude's role in my project. So it describes to Claude who it is working for and who is the audience. Most of my workspace is some form of content creation, so that it also describes who is it that we're creating content for. The second section is about the workspace itself. So how is it structured? Why is it structured in that way? And that should help Claude figure out, where does everything fit? Where does it go? Where can I look for things? If Louisa doesn't tell me specifically, right, it has kind of like a mental map of the workspace that we are working in. The third section is a how we work section. So that's a lot about my rules within the workspace and within content creation, and also my preferences. It functions kind of as a little bit like a soft guardrail, let's say. The last section is a section on tools and integrations. And this is borrowed from the standard format of a Claude.md file for a code base, where it's like a reference section so that Claude knows what it can work with. So, for example, it has a connection in this workspace. It can access my Gmail, it can access my calendar. So this is essentially like a list, like a cheat sheet of things that it has access to without going into depth about how to access it or what it's for. All right, so I just want to show you what it ended up looking like. So you can find the Claude.md file just in the root of your project. So this is my project folder, and the Claude is just sitting here. And as you can see, it starts with describing its role, that it's working for me, what I do, sort of in short. And the first thing just to remark is if I just scroll through, you can see it's not super long. So see, it's not an endless, exhaustive document at all. And that's really, really important, because the longer the Claude.md becomes, in my experience, the more things get lost in it. And that's what I was seeing in my old Claude.md, which had kind of gotten bloated over time and had a bunch of unnecessary information. There were some rules and some guidelines in my Claude.md that Claude just wasn't following anymore. Even though these models have, in some cases, extremely large contexts, what I find is that you quickly start running into degrading performance if you load too much information into them at once. Short, concise, very important. A brief description of Claude's role in this project. Here's the How We Work section, which has some sort of the most important rules. And if I take, for example, writing voice, you'll notice that the writing voice isn't exhaustively explained here. It is referring to the style guide and some examples that we made to help it if I'm asking for feedback on my writing, for example. Short, what the key principles are, but then instead of just exhaustively listing everything in this document, it refers out to other documents. That also helps to keep the context only to the most required information. If I keep scrolling, it has then an outline of the workspace, describes the structure of the workspace, and then the final section is this tools and integrations. So here it's showing what commands that it has available, the skills. It has just a list of the skills, and once again refers out to this skills folder for more information, for the details. And then which MCP integrations are available, and a bit about the front matter structure that I like to use in this project. And that's it. So it is essentially like a brief, maybe job aid, a short employee handbook, maybe we could call it, that orients Claude to what it's supposed to do, but also shows it where it can get more specific information if needed. So after I implemented this new Claude.md format, there was one major shift that I noticed, and it mostly had to do with how much it felt like Claude actually knows me. And that really manifested itself most of all in the feedback that I was getting on my writing. So I have two examples of where I noticed the difference, which I'll show you here. I recently spent some time sharpening up the copy on my website. So both of these examples have to do with website copy. The first one is I wanted to add some text. So I told Claude, I was trying to make the user feel a bit more handheld throughout the scrolling the front page. So I showed Claude this text here and asked for feedback. And it gave some positive feedback, but what caught my eye was this suggestion here to drop the exclamation point. And it suggested that based on how it understood my voice, And this is something I've never seen from Claude before. And I've had a style guide for a while, but I always got the sense that it just sometimes would ignore it, or whatever its pre-programmed notion of what writing should look like would somehow override my style guide. And suddenly now it seems to really be respecting, and it's calling out some really good changes. I did remove that exclamation point. So I thought that was a really nice feedback. And the second example I have is also in the same theme. I rewrote my About Me blurb, on the website. And once again, I got this. It flagged this AI curious, AI native, that it doesn't sound like me. And there was actually, after a few times of this very good feedback, this doesn't really like me, but I just felt really compelled to thank Claude. I wish I had taken a screenshot at the time. I can't find it again. I got some feedback and I just wrote something like, well, thanks for pushing back and keeping me authentic, something like this. And its response was, anytime, that's the job. And there was just something about that just really made it concrete for me that, okay, this job description as a Claude.md, we're onto something here. This is really working. So this is the major change that I noticed after I reframed the Claude.md file as a job description. Before, I had this bloated configuration file with a bunch of useless information that wasn't being respected anyway. And the feedback I got from Claude, it rewrote everything. So if I sent it like a paragraph, right, and I asked for specific feedback on the last sentence or something like that, it would often just decide to rewrite the whole thing. And as I said, it also looked a little bit like it was ignoring the style guide. And after I started using this Claude.md job description, I got suggestions, as you saw, that reflected my actual voice and tone. I got pushback when I wrote things that weren't really reflective of my voice. So I got this sense that Claude is now protecting my voice, whereas before it was a little bit diluting it or making it sound like AI. And I also see that it's prioritizing the style guide, and I'm not having to make as many corrections over and over again. So far, we've looked at what the Claude.md file is, how and why to rewrite it as a job description, what I noticed, specifically in my workspace, about Claude's behavior that changed, particularly about writing style and voice. My absolute number one suggestion is don't write it yourself. Ask Claude to help you. If you already have a Claude.md file, tell Claude you want to rewrite it as a job description. Give it those 4 section headings or different ones if you want to configure it differently. You can also have Claude interview you. You can, for example, give it, this is the task we're going to do. We want it to look like a job description. Here are the sections we want. Ask me questions to help you fill in the different sections until you have all the information that you need, something like this. When I did this myself together with Claude, I also really stressed how important it is to be concise. And I actually referenced Anthropic's best practices for writing skill files, which granted is not the same thing, but the principles for writing skill files are very transferable to writing the Claude.md file. And one of the things that they emphasize is being concise, not including information that the model knows out of the box, and making references out to other files instead of bloating the main file with a bunch of content. If you want some help in this process, I made an AI tutor prompt that you can just copy paste into Claude, and then Claude will know what to do to help you to write out the job description that you can use for your Claude.md file. So check that out in the description below. And if this tutorial was helpful, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.